these great folks who have all been working in multiple regions of esports, everyone from established regions to growing regions to everyone in between. And we're going to hear some really interesting thoughts, perspectives on this. I really want to understand the decisions behind it, the challenges that they've run into, and where the future is really looking. So, down the line, if we could please introduce ourselves, let us know who you are, what you do, and what brought you to esports.
Hi, my name is Zsuzsa James. I'm the managing partner and founder of Niko Partners. We're a market research firm focused on the games industry in Asia. We're approaching 18 years old, and so we've watched the evolution of digital games in China, Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, and so forth for all that time. And I think how it came to esports is that, in my opinion, Asia is the heart of esports globally, which is making it kind of ironic that it's called an emerging market. But yeah.
My name is Arnold Hur. I'm the COO at Gen.G eSports. We're a global esports organization in the top titles, around the top esports titles in the world, in the top esports markets in the world of Los Angeles in the US, Shanghai in China, and Seoul in Korea.
And hi, I'm there we go.
Yes, I noticed that my name got cut off there. So my name is Zsuzsa James, and I'm a trade commissioner for games and esports with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And a lot of people ask me, that's a thing? It is a thing as of March this year. So I joined the ministry. I'm based in Los Angeles. Before that, I worked in the private sector in the games industry in Finland for 10 years. And now I'm trying to build partnerships between the Finland and the US.
I'm Ari Segal. I introduced myself earlier. I think what brought me to esports was two things. One, at a high level, it was the people and the opportunity. So I saw all these really accomplished investor operators and brands that were trying to figure out a way to get into the fastest growing segment of media. And then at a micro level, my background is in pro hockey, obviously not a player. The biggest challenge that hockey faces is the relationship between playing and watching, and all the challenges that hockey confronts, esports and gaming really elegantly solves naturally. And so given that this thing had been a thorn in my side for the last 8 years, I thought esports would be a walk in the park, which of course it is not.
Awesome, and thank you for the introductions. Because each of you have a particular focus, I'm going to ask some person-specific questions, but ultimately if any of you have something to add, we'd love to hear it. So, Lisa, to kick things off, because you made the right point that China isn't necessarily emerging, can you tell us a little bit, like a super quick history of how long they've been active, or what does their leadership look like?
Well, we look at China and Southeast Asia as this cohesive unit that has a huge set of gamers. In fact, throughout Asia, we're probably looking at 1 billion gamers. And those gamers, even in China, where we have about 600 million gamers, roughly 80% of them say that they engage or view esports. So that's a lot of people. And when we think about them, they engage by either being spectators or participants, or there are Twitch competitive platforms, because Twitch itself is not there, but Douyu or Huya, some other platforms are there. And throughout Southeast Asia, we see other opportunities for people to engage. But there's an internet cafe culture, which one could argue preceded esports by having kind of the opportunity for team-based play or community play or local friend play side by side in an area where consoles were not prominent, and in the case of China, not legal for a long time. So we had a lot of local player opportunity on console-heavy nations, but in areas in Asia where that was not true, this iCafe opportunity kind of walked the user base toward esports, and when the games hit the market, they were a ready audience for it.
Now, when you talk about Southeast Asia, would that be an emerging region, or at least would there be some emerging opportunities there? But also, can you help us understand what countries?
Yeah, in alphabetical order, the countries we cover are Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. We also cover China, Taiwan, and we cover mainland China. And to a certain extent, we look at Japan and Korea as well, and increasingly India, where in all of those markets, there is emerging opportunity at one level or another. But what is universally true, with the exception maybe of India, is that what motivates gamers to play games are the tenets that make up the essence of esports. So things like competition, community, challenge, and completion, the ability to complete a session, which all conveniently start with C, so I call those the 4 Cs, and those are some primary motivators of most gamers throughout Asia, and that is why we know that esports is not a bubble in Asia, and it also helps define why gamers are so attracted to competitive gameplay, both to play and observe, and why the games that are played in esports competitions have the highest revenue out of, and the longest tail of engagement of all the titles.
And what are some of those games, and are they consistent across China and Southeast Asia, or are there hotspots?
The games kind of vary. Dota is really popular because it's lower cost to play. There's a game called Free Fire, which is super hot on mobile, coming out of Southeast Asia, and also really hot in Brazil and some other markets. Honor of Kings is wildly popular. It's known as Arena of Valor outside of China. You know, the usual League of Legends, PUBG, all the rest of it, there, you'd find some of the hottest titles outside, from the West, are available throughout Asia and are also popular, but there are lots of homegrown titles there as well.
So this is an interesting question I have for you, because for the longest time we've seen this incredible viewership numbers out of China across any major esports events. Now, when I talk to some OGs in esports, they, for some reason, doubt those numbers, but also, like, I came out of market research too, but and you and I both, like, I'm more inclined to believe those numbers. Can you help validate some of that? Is the scale actually there? Are people just being silly or defensive? Arnold finds this amusing too, so
well,
feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sorry, I feel like this is, okay. If you have 600 million gamers and 80% of them claim, self-avowed they participate or spectate esports, then a lot of the viewership numbers you hear about can be true. You know, even in 2017, the League of Legends World Championships held at the Bird's Nest Stadium that you might remember from the Olympics in Beijing. A huge stadium, had 40,000 seats filled, but 57 million people viewing at the same time. And then that could be from anywhere, but even the local tournaments, they get a huge amount of viewership, and there are streaming platforms that go public and more so, and it's all because of how popular their gaming channels are.
Because we've heard that there's about 5 or 6 platforms that are the size of Twitch, perhaps more, in the Asian marketplace.
I'm sure that's true.
Okay, no worries. Because I would love to actually bring it over, because we're speaking of Asia. You are a team that has rosters in the US, Korea, and China. Can you help us understand a little bit of the motivation there?
Yeah, so people always think, you know, it's some sort of like master plan, or, you know, geniuses out there or something like that. But it's really not that complicated, right? If you look at the esports world, and I mean, you said the same thing, like US, I mean, Korea and China are not emerging markets. If you look at the largest esports market in the world, it's China. Number 2 is US, and number 3 is Korea. So we're in the top 3 markets in the top titles. That seemed to make a lot of sense for us, right? Esports is global, and, you know, to your point on kind of the China fake streaming numbers, I mean, so we actually have a team of Koreans that are actually like international stars. They have huge following in China, actually. Their biggest fan base is actually in China, and a little bit here in LA, actually, or Vegas, I guess, in LA, actually. To the point, and we work directly in stream, and where we're using, you know, the TikTok equivalent, which is Douyin in China. And we'll post a video, and immediately, within a day, one of our players, a guy named Peanut, he's considered, I guess, pretty cute or something, and he gets 4 million views in a day, right, just from that clip. But the one thing about the streaming platforms is that you have to really be there to understand what's really going on. So we directly stream and have direct relationships with Huya, Douyin, as well as Douyu, the streaming platforms in China. So Right now, the rule is actually you divide that number by 8. So that's what they tell you, actually. If you have a good enough relationship, you get the China number, divide by 8. By next year, it might be 12, it might be 7, but you gotta know. Like, you gotta have that relationship, because you'll never know otherwise. But we are noticing some really unique trends. So in China, you have huge government investment coming in. They're really supporting the infrastructure behind what an esport is, and the thinking behind it is that, as the Chinese economy begins to lag because of, let's say, certain trade issues that are happening, the government actually views this as a great way to kind of keep younger people occupied, to do stuff, right? In Korea, what's happening is we are actually seeing that a lot of our players, we have actually kind of a much more advanced culture in Korea. One of the more unique things is we ran an esports event where we had a fan meeting and just an exhibition match for our Seoul Dynasty team. And we sold 1,500 tickets within the first 90 seconds, priced anywhere from $50 all the way up to $200. 90% of those tickets were actually to women, because they're almost viewed as like idols. So, we're seeing a really unique trend there where it's actually becoming much more mainstream than you see than you're seeing in the US. And then in the US, I think, what we're noticing here is, I think, really interesting, right? Like, number one, we're calling the Asian markets emerging when they've already emerged. Number two, the way I kind of view where the US is, I think we're really leading on media. Like, I love the fact that it's on ESPN, that it's on ABC. We're really leaning towards, taking the lead around PR and media, to the point where now I think we're seeing a trend where I like to think of it as, the C-level guy goes and finds the whoever reports to them on marketing and says, go figure out esports. The person in marketing has no idea what esports is and just tries to find the youngest guy on the team and ask, hey, what is esports? So I feel like that's kind of where the stage of where the US is. So I've been really thinking, like, it's really interesting kind of seeing all those three markets together. And I thought for us, it's a really unique way for us to kind of package us as a unique asset within the esports world.
Well, you mentioned something particularly interesting where you saw the media presence in the US as a strength compared to the rest of the world. So maybe if you can compare and contrast where else other strengths are in other countries, and maybe some weaknesses that we could all learn from.
Yeah, so I would say the weaknesses are that in Korea and in China, it's kind of like you have just a huge gap between kind of like the older population as well as the younger population. The younger population fully accepts esports as sports, right? I always say, I was born in LA, born and raised, but I've always thought that it was really cool that, Korea's not that great at team sports, right? We're probably never going to beat the US in basketball, but we're going to kick ass in League of Legends every year, right? So, for me, it's a state of pride, right? And it's a state of pride for any young Korean. So in terms of that, the one weakness there is there's a huge gap between an actual, let's say, where the parents' generation of what they think success is, being a lawyer, being a doctor, when what the younger people see is that I went to law school and I don't have a job. Right? So they're seeing that huge gap, and that's one thing that we've actually started to address. We've actually started an esports academy. One that includes both you basically go in the morning and learn esports, and in the afternoon you're actually getting a US high school education. So it's a really unique asset where we're able to really give
Just to be clear, that's in Korea or China?
In Korea for now, but we plan to expand. And so we get to really kind of show younger people that there could be a path where you can get a great scholarship into a US university, while still not trying to go full pro and probably failing, and still getting your US high school degree. So I think that's where there's a clear divide versus I think in the US, you have much more acceptance that you can kind of do both, that you can go to school. Hey, look, if you're good, you can kind of do it in your spare time. Maybe you'll turn pro, maybe not. So it's less of a binary decision. So I feel like the culture here is more accepting of more division of time.
So now that you have 3 teams across these regions and you have an overarching organization, is there any kind of cross-promotional content you can do from all of them? or is it just you have to recognize that if your Korean team's popular in China, you just focus on that? I'd just love to hear more about those marketing decisions on how to balance all of those regions.
Sure. There's two things, right? I think about, when we do big sponsorship deals, one of the more unique assets that we have is, hey, you're doing a global sponsorship with us in China, Korea, and the US. We can talk to your regional offices, because usually the C-level guy makes a decision and then it gets kicked down and they have no idea what this thing is, right? So a great example would be, I can't say the example because we haven't announced it yet, but basically you do a big deal and then we work with the local China office, we work with the local Korea office, and we work with the US office, and then try to make sure we activate very, very differently and uniquely. And when we find content that works in cross regions, then we actually go and explode that up.
Do you have any examples of that?
So a good example is actually TikTok. We actually have now started what we call a TikTok farm out of China. What they do is they just go and watch clips and try to figure out like what they think could be viral, and then just start feeding those clips, using Dropbox is banned, so Box. So Box to all of our marketing teams across the board. Because we said, look, unfortunately or fortunately, hiring somebody to do that in the US, they don't make that many clips for you, and they cost a lot, versus in China, for whatever reason, it's a lot cheaper, right? So we try to figure out like where we can find those unique efficiencies, but we let each market decide what that best content is, really shape the narrative, and then activate for sponsors so that it makes sense to the local consumer. So, it's always like that cheesy term, like think globally, act locally kind of thing.
We've seen it before in agency world, globally. One of those words I love to hate, but you have to use this sometimes.
So that's kind of one of the unique things that we use as our advantages. We're able to strike these big global deals using our more senior kind of corporate team, and then we go and activate them locally so that it actually seems authentic to gamers and to brands and to young people.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. So, Zsuzsa, a couple questions for you, particularly around the Finnish activities. We talked about this before when we were prepping for this. There's some actually really interesting numbers coming out of Finland around the pro output, the pro players that for some reason Finland is really good at outputting. But if you can give us like a couple seconds to wrap us up on what Finns have been doing in esports for.
Yeah, sure. It's also interesting. I was thinking about the same notion earlier, that is it an emerging market? Is it not? So because Finland has actually a very, very strong gaming DNA, and in terms of competitive gaming as a hobby, it's been around since '95 more. The first assembly event, which is actually the largest like LAN party, and / now there are obviously like more esports tournaments and that kind of stuff. It's been around since '95, but commercially, it's emerging for sure. There are not a lot of commercially successful teams, truly global teams, besides ENS, that's making real revenue. But still, what is one thing that Finland's been really, really good at, and I always like to draw this parallel between the games industry as a whole, which is. It's quite incredible that it's in I think it was like in 2016 or something, it's now 2.5 billion, it was 2 billion in revenue at the time, but that's basically 3,000 people generated 5% of like sales in the mobile app store. There was like 2 billion in revenue in the games market. And so Finns are really, really good at creating insane amount of value with small teams, right? Like small, potent, quality over quantity type of thinking. And so, but going back to how to translate to the numbers in esports, so you can look at, and I wanted to call it, I wanted to say this, that there's like 3 Finns in the top 10 highest earning, but the third one is at the 11th, so I'm going to call it the top 11th list. But anyway, in the top 11 highest earners, there's 3 Finns basically. It's quite, and also in the top 10 like highest earning, like by country, Finland is the 10th. It's like with 22 million or something. And that's with 1,300 or 1,400 players. So, and you asked me about like calculate the per capita thing. I was like, I didn't have the time. But it's anyway sounds like that. There is something. There's a lot of talent. in Finland, but it's emerging from a commercial standpoint for a number of reasons that I'm sure we're going to touch on.
Yeah, and that's really what I'm curious about, because we're joking about, like, is there some kind of per capita number? Because Finland's population is, what, 5.5 million?
5.5, yeah.
And out of all the pros versus all the other countries in the world, like, that actually could be a ridiculously high number.
Yeah, I think it is. If somebody wants to do the math, feel free to.
No worries. So let's actually talk about, because there's Finns have been so good in game development and outputting stuff, what are the first things that, if you were to look at more investment into esports in Finland, where would you start? Is it more leagues, more activity or community levels, amateur levels, more teams? Is there something that, there's a lot. I'd love for you to kind of walk us through, like, some of that thinking too.
I want to say all of the above. But truly, I was thinking about this as well. The reality is that in Finland the ecosystem is still very new. It's very fragmented. There's a lot of opportunity across all those areas. One of the key things in talking with people back home that comes up consistently time after time is capital, and the lack of capital into teams and leagues, and basically the ability for these really talented hobbyists to turn this into a career, into a meaningful career that actually, pays the bills. And a lot of that has to do with just in general, not enough, not enough money going around, I think, in the esports industry in general. Obviously, the biggest question for most people: where is the value? Where is the long-term, sustainable, scalable business model that actually warrants the type of investment that some of these businesses would need. And then, of course, on the flip side, it's also that sort of commercial thinking from the team's perspective, and the challenge of figuring out how to monetize products and services and then actually create those business technologies. Now, one of the things that actually, again, Finland has been really good at on the games industry side is figuring out technology plays and how to sort of like scale on the technologies, how to find basically the scalable components and innovation in any new business vertical. And so there is a big sort of push right now, actually, from the government side, an initiative that's underway of actually, which is partially publicly funded, to figure out where is the sort of like the value creation, what's the value creation in esports, how can brands actually find value in esports.
Now, one of my questions is, because Finns are so good at game development that we've seen, is there a potential for a competitive title to be developed? Is that something that some of the studios are looking at? Is that something that maybe you can or cannot talk about?
They already may have been doing. Well, obviously, the obvious answer is that there are already titles out there that our previous panelists have talked about. Supercell being one of the biggest companies in the world, arguably, and their titles translate very well to esports. But there are also a couple of companies like Nitro Games and Critical Force and some others that are developing and actively looking into and are developing esports titles, and there are others as well that are working on this. And now this is actually also something where sort of where Finland has a unique competitive advantage, I think, in my completely objective opinion, but in the sense that because there is that very, very strong, tight-knit community and knowledge sharing in the game space, and an incredible talent pool amongst creators and publishers. So what we're going to see, and I hope to see, and actually this weekend on the 14th is our first large international CS:GO tournament called Arctic Invitational, where they're also going to unveil like 5G mobile gaming or 5G like gaming as part of the whole experience. And so I think that because I want to say like 70 or 80% of developers in Finland are mobile focused. So I definitely want to see a lot more publishers specifically creating competitive mobile titles and creating, basically supporting the esports industry from that perspective.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So, all right, would love to kind of pick your brain about some of the specifics that you mentioned earlier as part of your keynote, that you double down on Brazil as an obvious direction for you. I'm more curious about the staffing portion of that. Just how do you handle managing teams? Any challenges or nuances there? Anything that we could learn from for there's another team that wants to do that, or another league that wants to grow in another region?
No
Anything you can
challenges,
share?
piece of cake.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that confidence.
Yeah, no, it's very challenging. So what we've tried to do as a business in our IGC Esports operating company is, instead of trying to aggregate audience, as many of our peer organizations have under kind of an eponymous brand, we've tried to go more niche with brands that resonate with a narrower subset of the community. And so, as kind of Arnold was explaining to you, Gen.G's unique value proposition to brands, it's bringing together the top 3 markets under one umbrella, right? Creating an entry point that gets you scale into markets. We are able to get brands scale across our brands, but we're hopefully, if we're doing our job correctly, able to go deeper within any of our individual brands. So our MIBR brand means something very different than our Valiant brand. And our MIBR brand is the one that we staff out of both Los Angeles and Brazil for a few different reasons. Number one, we have a Brazilian staff that is Portuguese native language speaking, grew up in Sao Paulo, lives in the offices with Gamers Club, and is really truly endemic, not just to esports, but to the MIBR brand and experience. What does that mean? What does it mean to be made in Brazil? It would be really strange if the people that we're evangelizing for that brand were not Brazilian. We've complemented our CSGO team with a Rainbow Six team because the games are culturally similar. They're both FPS, so MIBR is a little bit of an FPS genre game, and also because Rainbow Six for us right now gives us some additional inventory that we can cross-sell against with MIBR. Our MIBR players are higher profile. CSGO as a game is more developed. The ability of our players in MIBR who spend 200 plus days every year traveling is limited. But having our Rainbow Six team that's MIBR on the ground in Brazil all the time gives us a mechanism through which we can activate very, very frequently. So we have our MIBR players that are doing dual language content and participating and traveling globally that are co-managed by a Brazilian manager who travels with them, and then our American staff. But then we also have a Rainbow Six team that is in Brazil full-time, that's managed fully by Brazilian staff. And I think that that's been a really good solution for us.
So how's your Portuguese by now?
Non-existent.
Okay, fair enough. So what's really
Good
interesting...
management is delegating.
Fair enough. You hire the right people. I get it. So let's actually talk about the branding, because you have 3, or how many different brands now under the umbrella?
4. Well, plus Gamers Club, so 5.
Gotcha. So any other brands show other growth in other regions, or is it just Brazil? Like MIBR is just Brazil, the rest are global, the rest are American?
So the way that I would articulate it is, we often get the question of, how do you guys think about entering a game? Mm-hmm. And we think about it a little bit differently, in the sense that we're looking for white spaces. And it could be a white space within our portfolio. For example, we're definitely scouring the market for what's going to be the next culturally relevant mobile game in North America. That's a gaping hole in our portfolio. I think Clash Royale does some things really well, but I don't think it's achieved the scale of Honor of Kings in China, for example, and certainly doesn't resonate the way that Honor of Kings does in China. So in the event that we see a white space opportunity as it relates to game participation, we will look for what is the right brand fit. So we're not taking a top-down approach and saying, if we're going to go into a game, well, it's under Immortals, because the Immortals brand might not be the right fit for that market, or that audience, or that customer segment, or that publisher. And what we've actually found is, there are certain brands that have preferences or aversions to various content. The kind of archetypal example of that would be brands that just are avoiding first-person shooter Red Blood games. If you have one brand, I don't think that that brand is going to care if they're only doing your Overwatch team. If the same brand would be associated with Counter-Strike, that could be problematic. So there's an elegant solution there. But in any case, back to your question, we think about what is the white space that we're trying to attack, and what is the combination of game participation and/or other activity combined with brand that will make us differentiated within that white space. If it's truly white, hopefully one of the points of differentiation is that we're the first mover.
Got it, and I really appreciate that walkthrough. A question for essentially the two teams, Arnold and Ari. Is there something that you would share with another team who's looking to do the same, with another region? What's the first piece of advice that you would give them? Don't, yes, maybe. Which is it?
The advice I would give, and Arnold, curious what your opinion is, oftentimes I think people are afraid that the world is distributed. And the truth is, one of the great things about being in gaming, whether you're in esports or game development or anything else, is the pie is growing. So there's so much space for Arnold and I to have a similar strategy deployed in different markets and to trade stories and secrets and best practices and to help each other. We're not cannibalizing each other by both succeeding. And it's also true that people can attack geography with a different approach to branding.
You know, I started my career at Goldman Sachs, actually, in mortgage-backed securities and trading it. And the one thing that I learned, besides how to price CDOs, was the trend is your friend, right? And so in a growing market, it's all about just finding who you want to work with, who you can act fast with, and who you can capture the opportunity quickly.
Thank you, and I really, really appreciate that insight.